Mohawk Street is a busy thoroughfare that connects Whitesboro and Marcy, middle-class suburbs of Utica in upstate New York. Not far from where the road crosses the sluggish Mohawk River, down in the underbrush, just off the road, right there, is the spot where 16-year-old Kim Simon's battered and partially naked body was found on September 19th, 1985. In 1989, Steve Barnes, a fellow Marcy resident and former classmate of Kim's at Whitesboro Senior High, was convicted of her rape and murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison. The problem was, he didn't do it.
Was called a liar, murderous, rapist.
They didn't even have anything to really arrest him, let alone convict him.
People I thought were my friends, they weren't my friends.
It was just unbelievable to me that this man was convicted.
There always has been kind of a feeling on the part of too many jurors that he must be guilty, otherwise he wouldn't be there.
I had to fight for my whole life for 20 years to prove my innocence.
We got to it as a family. We never quit trying. We never quit praying. And we never, ever gave up hope, ever.
It can happen to anybody. What happened to me?
We were all incarcerated.
The verdicts read as follows.
The most conservative sources seem to indicate that about 1% of all prisoners actually were wrongfully convicted.
Guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
Larry Golden is an attorney in Utica, New York, and a member of the New York State Bar Association's Task Force on Wrongful Convictions.
Probably the more realistic figures are in the 3 to 5% range if you look at a variety of sources.
With America's prison population at more than 2 million inmates, that means as many as 100,000 prisoners today may be incarcerated for crimes they did not commit. As Steve Barnes says, it can happen to anybody. But how did it happen to him? To understand that, it might help to understand the place where Steve Barnes and Kim Simon grew up. Marcy is a large, predominantly rural town, dotted with clusters of residential subdivisions. In 1985, fewer people lived in Marcy than do today. But even then, it was a fairly typical American town, a place of backyard barbecues and Little League games.
We have a saying that we got on the bus in first grade and never looked back.
Ed Lewandowski is Steve's longtime friend.
And that's when we met at St. Paul's School in Whitesboro, first grade.
Steve's mom, Sylvia Bouchard.
Actually, Steve was a little bit on the shy side. He was very fun-loving and, always good in sports. He played football. He was an altar boy. They went through Catholic school, always willing to help around the house. Just a typical all-American kid.
He's a great guy. He'd do anything for anybody. Always hardworking, always very friendly. Really has a big heart.
We used to go out for hours and hours riding the snowmobile. We had this one dog that would follow us literally for hours, no matter where we went, miles and miles and miles. I'm Lisa Barnes Pulowski, and I am Steve Barnes' sister. Summertime, we went up to the Marcy pool, swimming lessons in the morning, freezing cold weather, and then ride our bikes back in the afternoon and swam all afternoon.
Marcy was a quiet town where Steve had had a normal childhood and where people felt safe. But on a warm September evening in 1985, that sense of security was severely shaken, and Steve's life was changed forever.
Kimberly M. Simon, 16, whose body was found off a lonely dirt road yesterday, was strangled. Oneida County District Attorney Barry M. Donalty said today.
At around 6 p.m. on September 18, 1985, Kim Simon left her home in Marcy on Route 49, also known as River Road, and began walking down Mohawk Street toward Whitesboro. She planned to meet a friend at the Whitesboro Junior High School, about 2 miles from her home, and then go for pizza. She never made it. When she didn't return home that evening, her parents notified police, who found her body the next day near the side of a dirt road off Mohawk Street.
the day after the homicide.
Edward Kaminsky is a Utica attorney, the first lawyer hired to represent Steve.
They had a roadblock at Kavanaugh Road and River Road.
Kavanaugh Road becomes Mohawk Street on the south side of its intersection with Route 49 or River Road.
And Steve lived on Kavanaugh Road, above where the roadblock area. He came through the roadblock initially. They asked him if he knew anything. He said, I didn't see anything. I know nothing. Fine.
They were looking for her. They were showing pictures on the corner of 49 and Mohawk Street. They asked me if I seen this girl, Cam. I said, no.
He went through the roadblock, cooperated with the police, went through the roadblock another time, cooperated with the police.
Although current Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara was not involved in Steve's prosecution, he's familiar with the details of the case.
The third time that he had to go through the roadblock, because he lived on the road, he went around the roadblock.
Steve had simply decided to stop for a six-pack of beer. He had just passed the beverage store, so he turned around by cutting through the parking lot of a convenience store on the other side of the street.
And there was unmarked cop car on a payphone there. And I just cut through the parking lot, not thinking nothing of it.
He just avoided it, set off all kinds of alarms. Oh, my God, where's this guy trying to avoid the roadblock?
When he did that, the police noticed it. They put a lot of weight on that. I don't know if I would, but they did. He then became a person of interest, so to say, because of that. They started interviewing him.
And ever since that day, it just kept going. I was 19 years old at the time. 3 days after the murder, they called me up and asked me to come over. I said, no problem. First hour, they were all nice, Then after that, they verbally harassed me for hours, asked me where I was on this night. 2 officers came in, looked me in the eye, and slammed their hand on the desk and said, you did this. I would argue right back with them, and they fingerprinted me. They took pictures of me.
And I came home that evening, and Steve wasn't home, and it was kind of strange. He hadn't called in, and he hadn't come home for dinner, and I was getting kind of nervous. And, of course, it was the day before cell phones.
I asked for phone calls. I asked to call my mom. I was gone all day. They said I never asked for one.
I mean, what 19-year-old kid, when he's getting questioned for a murder, is not going to call his family? He asked for his family lawyer. They wouldn't let him make a phone call. All day long. They had him there for 12 hours interrogation. Never let him call anybody.
Then they took me to Oneida, the trooper's barracks. I took a polygraph test, and then I went home.
It was like 11 o'clock at night, and he came knocking on our bedroom door, and he goes, Mom, you got to get up. I got a problem. And I opened up the door, and I said, what's the matter? And he says, I've been at the sheriff's department all day. I go, for what? He said, they're questioning me for Kimberly Simon's murder.
The results of the polygraph test were inconclusive, but Steve had an alibi.
I was home until about 5:30, and then I was stopped at 90's gas station, got gas, went to Riverside Bowling Alley the whole night.
My family owned it, so I was bartending.
Ed Lewandowski.
So he would always come in after his job. He's a construction worker. We'd all meet down there. That was the gathering spot.
He told them that he had been in the area. He did not see Kimberly. He had stopped and got $5 worth of gas and then drove to the bowling alley.
Current Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara.
They interviewed the gas station attendant, who was a young kid, who told the police that, yes, he knew Steve. He remembered pumping the $5 of gas, and that Steve drove to the bowling alley. And everything seems to be good at that point for Steve, I would say.
But in 1985, murders were fairly uncommon in Oneida County, especially in the idyllic town of Marcy.
This is a horrific crime. It's one of those crimes that it gets the whole community upset, scared. I mean, you're talking about a 16-year-old that's basically snatched off the road, raped, sodomized, and murdered. It's every parent's worst nightmare.
Attorney Edward Kaminsky.
At the time, this was big news. It was headlines in the paper every single day. Every single day it was in the paper. Everybody was clamoring for a result. We want to find the killer.
As the investigation continued, there was a Utica police officer, off-duty Utica police officer, who came forward and said that he was on Mohawk Street the night that this happened, and he remembered seeing something that he thought was suspicious. He told them that he drove by, he saw a male that would match the description of Steve, and that he was next to a pickup truck. He, interestingly enough, was shown a photographic array and did not pick Steve out at the initial stage.
Nonetheless, investigators continued to focus on Steve.
And they used to follow me around, made my life miserable. Talked to a few of my friends, hassled my ex-girlfriend.
They constantly watched him. They used to watch my house, sit on top of the hill. They used to follow him down to his girlfriend, call his girlfriend's parents, tell him your daughter's going to be the next one they find in the field dead, and just constantly harassed us, making our life miserable, especially Steve's.
They also did, interestingly, there was a truck lineup, but Steven's truck was the only one that looked like Steven's truck, and that was kind of an interesting thing.
And the officer said, "Yep, that's the red pickup truck I saw." During the matter, Judge Buckley was the presiding judge in the matter. Now he's in the appellate division in New York City. And I showed him a cartoon of a man, a rabbit, and a rock, and with a victim pointing at the man, saying, "That's the man, Your Honor." I mean, this is what it was.
Now the investigation continues for, I think, like 3 years. Ultimately, that police officer now picks out Stephen Barnes out of a photo array. What changed in those 3 years, or what took place when he was being shown that photo array, or all of that surrounding stuff, I have no idea. I don't know what all of a sudden made him be able to pick him out where he couldn't pick him out initially.
They arrested me on March 25th, 1988. And they come knocking at my front door, and the officer said, "You remember us?" And I said, "Yeah, how could I forget you?" And they said, "A few people come forward and pointed the finger at you, and you're under arrest."
On March 25th, in 1988, I walked in the door, and my younger son, Sean, was sitting there, and he said to me, "Mom, they came and picked up Steve." I go, "Who picked him up?" I'm thinking one of his friends, He said they came and arrested him for Kimberly Simon's murder.
I was in shock. I was yelling at the officers, screaming. I was with my brother and my girlfriend at the time. They were all freaking out.
I didn't want to live. I was devastated. I mean, I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. My God, how could they do this, I was like stunned, absolutely stunned.
I'm in the cop car, and I go, I can't even believe this is happening.
And it was the beginning of our 24-year nightmare.
The first witness of the day was Oneida County Sheriff's Department Lieutenant Charles Scheiderich.
They had Steve out on bail for a year. 14 months, actually. They arrested him in March, and it didn't go to trial till May of '89.
The case was prosecuted by Oneida County Assistant District Attorney William Kernan, who has since passed away. Steve's mother, Sylvia, had replaced Edward Kaminsky with a more experienced lawyer.
We hired the best attorney we could, in Salvatore Capisolatra.
Capisolatra is also now deceased.
He said, "We will represent your son. He hasn't done anything." So we were very confident.
At the time, my first impression was of his mother.
Lori Duffy Foster covered the trial for the Syracuse Post-Standard.
I guess I would describe her as if she was a rock. She was just very emotionally in charge of herself, or trying to be. I was very skeptical, and I couldn't quite form an impression from that. I had decided then that either she knew he was guilty, but he was her son, and she needed to stay strong for him, and she loved him, or she knew he was innocent and knew she had to keep herself together.
Steve's family and friends were confident of his innocence.
He could have never have done something like that. Never.
Steve's sister, Lisa Pulowski.
He was not good at lying. You can tell when he does. He can't look somebody in the eyes. Nope.
Ed Lewandowski.
It was ridiculous, because I saw him that evening. I saw him supposedly right after the crime was committed, according to their timeline. And to tell me that somebody I've known since first grade just went out and brutally raped and killed and then come and meet me and, hey, what's up, and talk about our day like any other day is just ridiculous, so I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, going back in time like that. But he was right there at Riverside Lanes. What's up, Steve? Nothing, So I knew he didn't do it. I knew he didn't do it from day one.
The timeline was key. Kim Simon left her house at around 6 p.m. and began walking down Mohawk Street. Steve said he wasn't on Mohawk Street at all that day, but that he left his house between 5:30 and 6, stopped for gas, and drove to the bowling alley on Route 49. During the initial investigation, a gas station employee corroborated Steve's story, but on the stand, he suddenly remembered things differently.
The gas station attendant changed his story.
Current Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara.
And said that Stephen did not drive to the bowling alley, that he in fact, turned down Mohawk Street right after Kimberly walked down the street.
I thought people were my friends. They made stuff up. The cops kind of strong-arm him, say this. He was a young kid, 16, 17.
And ultimately, I think that was a very, very harmful thing to Steve, because if that kid had continued to say, hey, listen, I saw Steve Barnes and he drove to the bowling alley. Stephen Barnes' alibi was at the bowling alley. Everybody in the bowling alley said Stephen Barnes was in the bowling alley.
If those testimonies of his alibi were correct,
Former Syracuse Post-Standard reporter Lori Duffy Foster.
then he would have had to kill Kimberly Simon and get back to Riverside Lanes in about 10 minutes. It was just unbelievable.
Other witnesses gave conflicting testimony. Some said they saw Kim on Mohawk Street and even said that they saw her talking to Steve in his truck. Others said they saw Kim and a man in a truck, but that it wasn't Steve and it wasn't Steve's truck.
And we were very confident. I mean, every day we come down the elevator and our defense attorney used to say, nobody heard us today. You know, even the prosecution witnesses really were helping Steve. You know, they'd say that wasn't his truck and this wasn't when I seen him and this wasn't the time and all.
Then there was the testimony of off-duty Utica police officer Philip Arcuri.
Officer Arcuri testified that as he drove down Mohawk Street, he saw a maroon pickup truck parked by the side of the road facing south.
The left front wheel, it was illegal, to my opinion. Illegal? It was like a ball tire.
The part that I found somewhat hard to believe afterwards, as you look at it, was he said that for like 2 minutes he had an opportunity to look at Steve, recognize a lot of stuff about Steve's truck, including that it had a bald front tire. Since that time, we've actually went and drove that road, and giving him the benefit of all doubts, it probably was a 6 to 10 second encounter to notice all these things.
Arcuri said he saw a young man walking near the truck, a man he identified as the defendant.
In 1985, Arcuri had not been able to pick Steve out of a lineup.
3.5 years later, he's picking me out and my truck. He said his memory was better after 3.5 years.
He couldn't see a thing without his glasses, and he claims to see Stephen Barnes while he's going 25 miles an hour past the pickup truck, and he doesn't know the guy. There's no way.
For the third day, testimony centered around lab results.
The prosecution claimed to have scientific evidence that would prove Kim Simon was in Steve's truck. For example, investigators had found in the vehicle 2 hairs that were similar to Kim's hair.
The first witness of the day was Anthony Orlowski, a senior lab technician with the New York State Crime Lab in Albany. Capisoletto asked Orlowski to read a section of a report prepared by another lab analyst who had examined samples taken from Stephen Barnes' pickup truck.
Nothing was discovered which would show an association between the vehicle and deceased. Go ahead. Because control hair was not submitted from the owner of the vehicle, no comparison of hair was conducted. Thank you.
That hair means nothing to me. It was consistent with Kimberly's hair. Well, so was Steve's sister's hair.
The police had also found a denim imprint on the side of Steve's truck.
That imprint apparently matched or was very similar to the jeans that Kimberly was wearing. They put a lot of weight into that. I don't today, because how many jeans are out there that could match that?
There had also been mud on Steve's truck, which the prosecution claimed was consistent with soil samples taken from the spot where Kim's body was found.
And they went and took the dirt like 2.5 years later from the crime scene.
A couple of other pieces of forensic evidence seemed to contradict the prosecution's arguments. First, tire track impressions taken from the scene did not match the tires on Steve's truck. And second, experts testified that semen found on Kim's underwear could not be conclusively matched with Steve's blood type. But the prosecution did have one more piece of seemingly incriminating evidence.
I had a jailhouse informant when I was in the county. He said I told him I did this, and I never spoke to the guy, but he got a time cut.
A question was asked Mr. Barnes about a girl, and Mr. Barnes says, "Who do you mean, the girl I killed?" I mean the one I'm accused of killing. Freudian slip?
I didn't even know who he was, but he said I spoke to him.
The evidence was it was almost comical.
Former Syracuse Post-Standard reporter Lori Duffy Foster.
If there had not been lives involved here, life and death, it would have been comical.
Is this the type of evidence you would want your husband, your brother, your son convicted of?
They had no evidence on him.
Steve's sister, Lisa Pulaski.
There was nothing, and I knew he didn't do it, never in a million years.
Even the prosecutor himself admitted that it was all circumstantial evidence. The scientific evidence was unreliable.
In the beginning, I said this case was built around circumstantial evidence.
I just thought this is going to be a formality. Okay, we're going to go through all this, and very difficult to, sit there and listen to them give all this testimony. And
each piece of this circumstantial evidence is a piece of that puzzle that we're going to put together.
I'm not entirely convinced that the prosecutor was certain of his case. On the closing day, when the jury went into deliberations, he had said that he was hopeful that the jury would put the pieces together and find him guilty. And then he said, and this is how I quote him in the story, if Barnes is found innocent, then we're back to square one. He didn't say if Barnes is found innocent, then a murderer runs free or anything like that. He said, then we're back to square one. And it just seems to me that William Kernan was wavering, that he was convincing himself as well as the jury.
It was said to be a long, tense day. The parents of the victim held hands. The mother of the man accused of killing her carried rosary beads.
Of course, I was there on the day that the jury went out and was deliberating, and the next day when the verdict came back, I was there.
Steve's friend, Ed Lewandowski.
I didn't go that day. I couldn't.
I said, they can't convict me of this, On June 2nd, they did.
The jury came in. The clerk asked what their verdict was on the first count, one of rape.
On the charge of rape in the first degree. Guilty.
I thought for sure I was going to be not guilty. When they said guilty, I was in a state of shock.
One by one, the jury foreman read the verdicts. Guilty of rape, sodomy, and murder. The Barnes family reacted with anger and grief.
I immediately started crying and looked at my brother, and
the defendant at first looked ahead at the desk in front of him, then dropped his head.
I melted right there. There's a famous picture of me with my head down. I just started crying, and I just went into shock. I was like, can't even believe this is happening to me,
I threw up. I got physically sick. I couldn't believe it. The kid, they had no evidence. I just didn't understand what they convicted him on.
I was shocked. I was very much shocked, as was, I think, much of the courtroom. I remember he cried, but I remember his mother did not. I mean, you could look at her and see she was on the verge, and you could see it was a huge battle for her.
When they announced the verdict, I could not believe it. I just couldn't believe it.
But it was almost like she said to herself, I can't afford to break down. I need to just accept this and move on to the next step. Publicly, she was just a rock.
I never took a drop of food or water or anything for 7 days. I didn't even want to live. I thought, this can't be happening.
The only thing I can think of is that they believe the testimony of what I believe to be the lies of the Utica cop, and they believed him. Cops aren't supposed to lie.
I know the trial strategy of the defense lawyer was that the prosecution had to prove their case. They had proved that Steve was guilty, and Steve did not prove that he was not guilty. So Steve didn't take the stand.
I think a big part of it, though, for the jury was the fact that Stephen Barnes did not testify. That never looks good to a jury. So if they were unsure one way or the other, that might have thrown them in the direction of guilty.
This was a Friday afternoon, and they had been deliberating Thursday and then all day Friday. And
if you look at how long the jury deliberated, they deliberated 10 hours one day and 6 hours the next. So they clearly were torn as well. If they were certain of his guilt, they would have come back a lot faster than that. But I personally don't even know how the jury could have deliberated that long.
In my opinion, they didn't want to be sequestered for the weekend. They wanted to go home to their families.
On August 31st, 1989, Steve was given the maximum sentences allowable for the crimes. 8 1/3 to 25 years for the rape and sodomy charges, and 25 years to life on each of 3 counts of murder.
I'm innocent of all charges. I didn't commit these charges.
Salvador Capisalatro.
I meant what I said. I have an undying belief that my client is innocent.
Unfortunately for Steve, today, he would have never got convicted because the DNA isn't his DNA, and we would have known that, and it would have never been tried.
I never told anybody in prison good morning, or never a good morning in there. It's just the way it is. I was in Wendy out near Buffalo, Greenhaven down near the city, with in Poughkeepsie. I was in Eastern, Southport, out near Elmira. I was in Auburn for a little bit. Passed through Sing Sing. About it.
Steve Barnes is a tall, brawny man with light brown hair. He's quick to smile, with an easygoing manner and a perpetual glint in his bluish-gray eyes. Steve looks much younger than a man in his mid-40s, despite the hardships he's endured.
I just seen guys get stabbed all the time. I seen guys get hot oil thrown on them, their skin melted off. Seen guys get burned up in their cell. I was in a mess hall. There was a riot. They dropped tear gas.
It's a maximum security prison, so there's some scary people in there.
Steve's friend, Ed Lewandowski.
It's a scary place, and it made me feel awful that, that he had to spend day after day, week after week, year after year in a place like that for a crime he didn't commit. It was just awful. It was scary.
I had to stab somebody. I got stabbed. It's part of the lifestyle you're forced to live. You got to fight for yourself, stand up for yourself, and people respect you. It's just all gang stuff, so you got to endure a lot of violence through the years,
He expressed to me one time that, he was going to be going out in the yard, and he may not be coming back. Something bad was going to happen.
Violence, prisons, there's something always happening every minute. You walk out into the yard, there's 800-900 guys, and they're all in their little cliques and gangs, and something's always popping off. It's a type of place.
And it's being naive and being a person on the outside. You can't imagine what's going to happen. I mean, you see things on TV. There's prison riots and so forth, but to actually be involved in one, I couldn't. I have no idea what that would be like.
The strong survive, and the weak you don't make it. You just got to be tough, strong-minded, and have a strong heart. And
he was reserved, especially in the very beginning. He was very, very scared. I mean, as well as we were.
Steve's sister, Lisa Pulaski.
He was only, 22, 23, however old he was. And, here he was in a maximum security prison with murderers and rapists and really some scary, scary people.
You always had to have your guard up. Never trust nobody. You don't have any friends in prison. You got associates. As you get time in, guys see how you carry yourself, and you earn your respect through the years. 20
long, long years. Without fail, we were there through snowstorms, through no matter what kind of weather there was. We went and visited. After I had my kids, I'd pack up the bottles and the diapers and the baby food and extra change of clothes and carted the kids out there to see them.
We had to go visit, make sure we kept his spirits up.
Steve's mom, Sylvia, visited him, without fail, every weekend for 20 years.
I used to talk to him about anything and everything in town. Who got married, whose grandmother died, who had a baby.
And he's in his jumpsuit, and you try to talk about what's going on or what he's interested in, and
whatever we could talk about to just keep his spirits up. His visits were very important.
You knew you didn't belong there. You knew your brother didn't belong there. You did what you had to do, but when you left and you hear those prison doors clanging behind you and knowing that your brother is still in there.
On the way down, I used to want to vomit to think my son was in a place, and then when I got out of there, I wanted to die because he couldn't come home with me every single trip.
Some wrecking there. You just got to stay busy. I used to always lift a lot of weights. I was a power lifter. I was really big and strong. I held the record in a few jails there for lifting the most weight. I did a lot of reading. I read a lot of law books. I always fought it for my case. Studied on DNA, wrote letters to everybody, trying to get my case open. And That's when I got involved with the Innocence Project.
In 1993, I have the original letter, August 1993. I was watching the Phil Donahue show, and he had on Barry Scheck with about 5 guys that he'd gotten out with this new thing called DNA. Well, DNA to me was 3 letters in the alphabet. I'd never heard of it. So I listened very intently.
The best way to explain DNA is your genetic fingerprint.
Ray Philo is the former chief of police in New Hartford, New York, and is currently a professor of criminal justice at Utica College.
And without getting incredibly scientific about DNA, it is unique to you. Therefore, if we can analyze DNA evidence that is left behind, which now we can, it can go back to one particular person.
DNA can also exclude particular people. That is, it can prove that they weren't involved in a crime.
We do post-conviction DNA work. We represent people who are claiming innocence, who have been convicted of crimes where there's DNA evidence that could prove their innocence and get them out of jail.
Alba Morales is an attorney who works for the Innocence Project, an organization founded by Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld. Steve's mom, Sylvia, decided to enlist the Innocence Project's help.
I knew they were from Cardozo Law School in New York City, so I called information. It was days before computers and everything, so I got the address and I wrote directly to them. I still have the letter, August 1993. They sent a letter back, and they said that to send the transcripts and everything, they'd be willing to take a look at Steve's case. Steve was case number 0018, so it was relatively new. They were very small. They worked out of the college, and the students more or less did the work. And in them days, it wasn't pro bono. You had to pay for your own laboratory work and all that. They weren't high rollers.
The Innocence Project agreed to take Steve's case, but DNA testing was not as advanced then as it is today. And as Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara points out, DNA technology was fairly new at the time of the crime.
Nobody in '85 knew that you're supposed to do what we do today when you collect it and store it.
When they collected evidence back in the 80s, they put some solution on these slides. It broke down a lot of the DNA, and it came back inconclusive.
It was a really tough day when I had to go and tell Steve that, because we really thought he was coming home that summer. And that was back in 1995.
And then years later, Steve's brother, Sean, came to this Innocence Network conference and basically, just pigeonholed Peter Neufeld, who then sent him over to Hui Dao, who's the head of our intake department, and, he just pled his case.
Alba Morales was new to the Innocence Project.
Steve's was actually one of the very first cases that I picked up. When I came on board, I remember Steve's case being presented at one of the very first intake meetings, and we all agreed that it met the mandate and that it was a case that we really should have taken.
I got a call from Maddie DeLone, who's the executive director of the Innocence Project. She's right under Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, saying they were going to reopen Stephen's case, and I said, thank you, God.
I remember reading the transcript and sort of, talking to my paralegal and saying, I think we're missing a portion. I think there's something. It was just unbelievable to me that this man was convicted based on the evidence presented. And I kept thinking there must be something, there must be some huge gap in my understanding of what the testimony was or what the evidence was, and was pretty horrified to find out that there wasn't a gap, that really, the evidence that was presented against him is all they had, and that they were able to get a conviction out of that. I thought was pretty spectacularly shocking.
Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara quickly agreed to release evidence from the case for another round of DNA testing, which began in June of 2008.
And they told me it was going to be 3 to 6 months. It may be up to a year because the evidence was now 24 years old. And don't forget, it could come back inconclusive again because the evidence was, older.
I knew that his family was absolutely desperate to have him home by the holidays, and I wasn't at all sure that was going to happen. And so when it did happen, that was really wonderful.
It was the Friday before Thanksgiving, and I came home, and my husband said to me, you got to call the Innocence Project. They just called.
It was my daughter's 10th birthday. It was November 21st, 2008.
So I called, and his lawyer was on another line, and they said, can she call you back in half an hour? And I said, well, I'm going to give you my daughter's number because I promised my granddaughter I'd be there when she got off the bus with her presents.
My brother's lawyer from the Innocence Project called in my house looking for my mom, and that was kind of unusual. She didn't do that, and I said, no, she's not here yet. She's probably at home. You can reach her up there. And
so we go down to my daughter's house, and my daughter meets me on the front porch. She goes, Mom, you got to call the Innocence Project. They've called here again. So I go, wow.
We kind of figured something was up because she had tried so hard. So my mom called back down to New York and got a hold of the lawyer. And
she said, are you gearing up for Thanksgiving? And I said, not really, because we always held out hope Steve would be home. And she said a sentence I'll never forget as long as I live. Said another place at the table, your son's coming home on Tuesday.
And at that point, she was screaming and yelling and crying, and he's coming home, he's coming home. And
she's like, who's coming home? She got so upset. I said, your brother's coming home on Tuesday. He's getting released.
And just then, Steve called.
And my daughter accepted charges. She said, Mom's got to talk to you. I couldn't wait another sentence. I just said to him, Steve, you're coming home. And he just started crying. He hollered out to everybody. He goes, guys, I'm going home. And you hear the guards cheering and the inmates are banging on the bars. And this went on for quite a few minutes. And he couldn't talk and I couldn't talk. Tuesday, he came home.
I got a phone call early one morning from Sean Barnes and his brother saying that he was going to be released. And I had a reoccurring dream that I got a call from, but was from his mother, my dream. And I was just like, Sean, I've had this dream so many times that he was going to be released. Is this not? He goes, it's true. So, and then to see him walk through the door, and have the shackles taken off of him. It was just incredible. It was like Christmas.
Oh, I can remember that morning driving there. I was driving myself there, and I'm thinking to myself, how many other people in this world right now are driving to the release of their brother that's been incarcerated for 20 years for a crime that he didn't commit? And I was thinking to myself, nobody. I'm the only one that this is happening to today. But still was afraid that something was going to happen at the last minute and they're going to change their mind, and it really wasn't going to happen.
They still had to bring Stephen all chained up just like an animal, even though they knew he was already innocent. And Scott McNamara was there, and he, read the results of the DNA, and this excluded him, and I asked that the verdict be vacated. And Judge Dwyer says, I'm vacating the sentence, and you're free to go.
Attorney Larry Golden.
To me, the most vivid moment was when Stephen was brought into the courtroom. He had handcuffs and shackles on, and a female deputy sheriff was told to remove his handcuffs. And she removed them, and I heard the chains that dropped to the ground.
That was probably one of the most dramatic moments of my life. That was just, you could hear a pin drop, and then you heard those shackles drop to the ground.
And the noise kind of echoed, at least in my mind, through the whole courtroom. And people I've talked to said that to them, that was one of the most incredible sounds that they'd ever heard.
And it was like a truck was lifted off my back. Even the cameramen were crying. You couldn't help it. You just couldn't watch it without being emotionally involved, even if you didn't know him.
You could just look around the room and see tears in people's eyes and smiles as broad as you could ever hope to see. And it was just an incredible atmosphere.
No plate glass today as he hugged his mom, stepdad, and siblings for the first time in nearly 20 years.
So I'm overwhelmed, It's the happiest day of my life. I waited for this for 20 years.
20 years that saw sweeping changes in a world that stayed exactly the same in Barnes' prison cell.
No, I don't know what the internet is. I don't know what a cell phone is. No,
What about a BlackBerry?
Yeah.
I was in shock the first few days. I lived in the town of Marcy my whole life, and I couldn't believe all the different places were gone and new houses, apartments. All the cars have changed.
Ed Lewandowski recalls Steve's fascination with new technology that we take for granted.
GPS, what's that? He was loving that. So you just plug in the address. I go, yeah. And it tells you, it'll talk to you, tells you where to go. He's like, come on. And I'm like, yeah.
I remember when I first went into a restaurant and you walk into the sink and put your hands under the faucet and the water comes on and automatic. They didn't have that years ago.
That first trip to a restaurant came on the day of Steve's release.
It's a tradition of the Innocence Project. They take you out for your first meal.
Larry Golden was at that dinner.
I looked over and Stephen was looking at his food, but also holding a fork in one hand and a knife in the other hand and looking kind of back and forth at these two utensils. And someone said, "Is something wrong?" And he said,
Man, real silverware. Haven't used silverware in 20 years.
And it just really drove home the meaning of what he had lost in those 20 years.
Small things that other people be big things to me. Like, when I first came home, my mom was up Marcy. I was to take a walk.
I said, you know what it was? To go for a walk and I could go as far as I wanted. He said, no guards are watching me and there was no fence. I go, Steve, I never thought about that.
Just shy of 2 months since Stephen Barnes' murder conviction was vacated, today he's exonerated on all charges.
It was January 9th, 2009.
Our system, which I still believe is the best in the world, failed Mr. Barnes. And for that, I'm sorry.
Though Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara was not involved in Steve's prosecution, he offered him an apology. And Steve reflected on things that might have been.
Well, I missed out on career, the family.
When they get out, you don't know. Is this going to be somebody who lands on his feet? Is this going to be somebody who's going to have a rough transition back?
Alba Morales, Steve's Innocence Project attorney.
It's so sudden. It's not like, he's paroled and then he goes through this whole process. It's, he's in, he's out.
I had to start over when I came home. I didn't have a license. So the first few months I was home, I had to rebuild all my identification, copies of my Social Security card, because I always tell everybody the world moved on, but Steve Barnes didn't. So when I got out, I was like a 16-year-old kid again. I had to rebuild my life.
When Steve first started to work with us,
Steve got a job with Youth Build, a program of Oneida County Workforce Development. Sarah Bogart is his boss.
Honestly, I felt awful for Steve. You just have to feel bad for someone that's been in jail for 20 years for absolutely no reason.
Steve mentors at-risk youth and teaches them the trade he practiced before he went to prison.
This is Johnson Park.
Today, Steve and his kids are rehabbing a building in one of Utica's more impoverished neighborhoods.
And the kids are learning how to do tile, staining, molding. We did painting. We actually did some demolition. We tore up the old flooring, old carpet downstairs. So
Steve's doing great. He does construction with the kids, and really he loves it. He does a great job, and they love having him there.
Some of them are on probation. Most of them don't have GEDs. Single-family homes. 4 or 5 girls in the program. They're single moms.
Some of them have a lot of different issues in their own lives. So to see someone who's been through all of that and is still so positive, he's just a great role model for them.
Most of them get their GED, they learn construction, the other ones go on to college. I feel like, I help them out and I feel good about it,
It's got to be hard to talk about it, but in a way, it has to be good for him.
I'll be probably mentally scarred forever. It's not like it was a couple years. I almost spent as much time on the street as I did in prison, so it'll always be in there in my mind. I'll never forget it. I'll always talk about it, try to change laws, and it's like therapy for me, I guess, to talk about it.
And so with that, I'd like to introduce Stephen Barnes.
Thank you, Larry.
He's done a number of programs that he and I have collaborated on. And
attorney Larry Golden.
The more interested I became in his experience and the Innocence Project, the more involved I've become in the issues of wrongful conviction, to a point where last year I was appointed to the New York State Bar Association's Special Task Force on Wrongful Convictions.
The task force has proposed several pieces of legislation aimed at reducing the number of wrongful convictions. Understanding the causes is an important first step toward reform.
Probably the primary cause is eyewitness misidentification.
We as not only practitioners in law enforcement, but in criminal justice academics are beginning to learn that humans, we are fallible, we make mistakes.
Ray Philo worked in law enforcement for 30 years and teaches criminal justice courses at Utica College.
False identifications are a big problem.
Over a third of exonerations had mistaken eyewitness identification as a factor.
So we need to institute some safeguards and those type of things.
There are a lot of reforms that you can make to the process through which witnesses are asked to give identifications. Right now, you have a victim of a crime is asked to look at a lineup, and there's 5 or 6 people, and so they pick the person who most resembles the perpetrator, right? As opposed to sequential lineups. If you have a sequential array where the witness doesn't know what the last photograph is, and so they're going to look at each suspect sort of on his or her own merits and determine, is this person, is not the person. So identifications become a lot more reliable.
Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara suggests another possible reform to the identification process.
I think the photo array procedure should be videotaped so that there's no doubt what goes on inside of that room. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong, but we would know now that nobody did anything wrong.
Steve advocates for mandatory videotaping of all suspect interrogations.
So if you ask for a phone call, or if you ask this, and these cops can't shut the door and verbally harass you and, get crazy in there, so.
There are also instances, like the jailhouse snitch in Steve's case, when someone else comes forward to claim that the suspect made a confession.
Somebody who's incarcerated that's selling us their story for a favorable disposition, that has to be videotaped. I believe that's where we need to be, because those are the people that are most likely to exaggerate and lie.
They talk to him to this day, and he's like, I never testified. I don't know nothing.
Which then leads me to believe that guy might not have been totally truthful if he doesn't even remember testifying.
Another cause of wrongful convictions is faulty forensics, what we call junk science. This was an issue in Steve Barnes's case.
The gene imprint found on the side of Steve's truck.
Really? Fabric? Unless you're going to point me to a database of all of the denim that's ever been produced in the world, and here's how often this particular, occurs, that's not science. That's some guy looking at an imprint and looking and like, yeah, they look the same. So what?
The similar hairs, the similar soil samples.
He didn't say there was anything particularly distinctive about, there's, 2 bushels of this dirt in the entire universe, and they're only found, in this location. And it just seemed so on its face absurd to me that somebody would compare dirt samples and just say it matches.
It's easy to go back and second guess what people did years later. And trust me, I realize that every day I do my job, that someday, 20 years from now, someone will be second guessing what I did.
Even giving the benefit of the doubt to every single prosecution witness, I didn't see how that led to the conclusion that Steve did this. I was a trial attorney. You have faith in the jury system. It's what you sign on to do. And to see it fail that miserably is a little disheartening.
The reality is that even though you have all kinds of protections in the criminal procedural law, there always has been kind of a feeling on the part of too many jurors that because he's being prosecuted and because he's there and they're putting in this evidence against him, he must be guilty, otherwise he wouldn't be there.
In that time period, it's so much different than it is today. With all the CSI shows that are out there, it's just a different world, and the general juror has a different knowledge than they did back in '85.
The paradigms of investigations clearly have changed. Looking at how cases are done now, I believe that there could not be a conviction based on the evidence of those standards. Once again, the paradigms have changed in those 20 years considerably, mainly because of the advent of forensics and forensic evidence such as DNA.
The problem is, how do you give Steve back the 19 years of his life that he lost? That's the sad part.
Everybody asked me, you're going to get money, you're going to get this, but, I always ask people, I said, would you give up, say, 5-10 years of your life, or maybe $5 million? Would you take the money?
New York is one of the states that provides compensation for victims of wrongful convictions.
Whatever money they give me, it's not going to replace the 20 years that I lost.
Attorney Larry Golden.
What a lot of people don't think about also is the fact that if a person is wrongfully convicted, this impacts their entire family.
We're all incarcerated. And when you have a loved one in, you don't enjoy anything. And how can you enjoy holidays when one of your sons is sitting in a cell for something he didn't do, heartbroken, But we got through it as a family. We never quit trying. We never quit praying. We never, ever gave up hope, ever. That was the key to it.
But wrongful convictions don't just have an impact on the individual and his or her family. There are also disturbing implications for society as a whole.
When you put the wrong person in prison, this means that the right person, the actual perpetrator of the crime, is still on the loose.
And who knows what else they could have done in that 20 years as well. Luckily, there's still a task force working on it, and they're trying to bring the killers to justice.
In March 2010, Kimberly Simon's murder was featured on America's Most Wanted. The program revealed that current investigators have identified persons of interest in the case. Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara says that these people were also suspects, if only briefly, in 1985. One of them was even involved in Steve's alleged jailhouse confession.
Their names had come up back then. One of them was incarcerated with Steve and happened to be at the same place when Steve supposedly made this statement and was the ringleader from the paperwork I've read to get the other guy to say, yeah, that's what I heard, that's what I heard. That's disturbing.
Since the America's Most Wanted episode first aired, DNA analysis has helped McNamara and his team identify another person of interest who was not previously a suspect.
This is the first time we've actually had a hit that makes somebody a viable target. And from other information in the case, we can put that person in and around that area that night. So we're not at a point where we're going to be able to arrest anybody, but I think we're definitely making some positive progress in this case.
But for now, what actually happened to Kim that night remains a mystery.
We have always believed that there are people out there that do know what happened. And, obviously we're once again pleading with those people to come forward and tell us what they know. It's time. It's time to let Kimberly's family have their justice and really Steve Barnes deserves some justice here someplace. It would be nice for him to at least know who did this, I think, just so that he can move on with his life too.
Tell people what happened to me and what happened to Kim Simons. Two wrongs don't make a right. I feel bad for their family, what my family went through, and I hope someday there's closure in this for the DA's office, her family, me, so everybody can move on with their lives.
I think we're finally at that point, at least I am. I'm not sure if I speak for the rest of my family and for Steve, but I think I'm at the point where it doesn't even matter anymore. I've got my brother back.
Amazingly enough, he still has a big heart. For him to come out and say, I'm not even going to worry about it and I'm moving forward, it's just testament that this guy has it all together and has his heart in the right place.
Oh, I'm incredibly proud of him. I think for what he's gone through and to come out with the attitude he's had when he came home, he said, Mom, I left it all in that cell because they got 20 years of my life. And if I let that bitterness consume me, I'm not going to enjoy the rest of my life, and I'm going to enjoy it.
His motto is every day is a holiday, and he enjoys life to the fullest.
People say, oh, you're always on the go. I say, yeah, because just think all the things you did the last 20 years. I didn't have that.
I truly believe that in order to experience true happiness, you've got to have experienced some sadness in your life. And for 20 years, I, had pent-up rage and sadness. And with every passing day, a little bit more of the old me comes back. And so it's good that not only my brother got his life back, but the rest of my family got our lives back too.
Steve and I are so close now. Very close. Closer probably than any mother and son could be, We have a bond together and we went through so much.
Sylvia's in a rehabilitation center, recovering from a leg injury she received in a car accident.
It's just like the other night, Thursday night when we had the blizzard. And I texted him and I said, Steve, don't come to visit tonight. I'm fine. I'm safe. I want you safe and stay home. And he walked in the door and I said, what are you doing here? You know what he said? You came to see me whether there was a blizzard or not. You always hit the gate. And a blizzard's not going to stop me. I got a 4-wheel drive. He goes, Ma, there's so many times I thought, Mom, she won't get here. The weather's terrible. No, they call my name for a visit. So That's what family's about. You're there for each other.
We Were All Incarcerated was written, narrated, and produced by Geoff Storm, with music composed and performed by Ryan Miller, and additional voiceovers by John Simmons. Special thanks to Steve Barnes, Sylvia Bouchard, Lisa Pulaski, Ed Lewandowski, Scott McNamara, Larry Golden, Alba Morales and the Innocence Project, Lori Duffy Foster, Ray Philo, Edward Kaminsky, Sarah Bogart, Aaron Covey, WUTR and WKTV Television, and Town Square Media. Nationwide, the Innocence Project has secured 261 exonerations based on DNA evidence. Those exonerees spent a combined total of more than 3,000 years in prison.
It can happen to anybody. What happened to me?